Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. Have you heard of critical race theory, or CRT as it's often referred, where a race lens is applied to every discipline, to every law, to every intersection within society? Are you in favor or against this theory? Well, hold on, you might be saying. I have never even heard of CRT before today. Why should I care? Well, for one, CRT is highly controversial and has caused much debate south of the border. In September 2020, for example, then U.S. President Donald Trump banned CRT from government agencies. In November 2021, Virginia's gubernatorial race seems to have been decided by parents who called for an end to the teaching of CRT in their kids' classrooms. Well, that's the U.S. What about Canada? Well, CRT is here as well, and may very well be influencing your workplace policies and even your child's education. In Ontario, for example, several school boards have released equity lesson plans developed from intersectionality theories, including critical race theory, and sometimes segregating students into privilege and oppression hierarchies. I've even personally heard stories of children in Ontario classrooms being taught that 2 plus 2 can sometimes equal 5, because 2 plus 2 equaling 4, well, that could just be their binary truth and part of their white Eurocentric patriarchy. And now, to further entrench CRT, the NDP opposition in Ontario has introduced Bill 67, Racial Equity in the Education System Act, which will enshrine CRT in education. And with barely any opposition, only one MPP voted against it, this bill is sailing to third reading. That's right, even the Ford Conservatives supported this bill. So is CRT a good thing or a bad thing? Is it helping or hurting our children? And does it actually have anything to do with ending racism? Well, joining me now to help unpack it all is Samuel Sey, a Ghanaian-Canadian blogger and speaker from Ontario who has been vocal about his criticism and concerns of critical race theory. Samuel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a long overdue discussion, but I'm glad to have you on because you have really been prominent in the discussion and raising concerns about critical race theory. So I'm sure you could do a far better job than I did in my intro, but could you please explain to our viewers what is critical race theory?
No, you explained it really, really well.
Oh, really? I think I confused a lot of our viewers with some of the jargon I use there.
No, well, you know what? It's funny you say that because that's actually a good way to describe critical race theory. It uses a lot of words to complexify the issue, and by doing that, they make it hard for people who are not the kind of Ivy League school lawyers to think of it as just being really what it is, racism, right? Because they use words like anti-racist. They're using so many other jargons to hide what they're really saying. So it is very much a confusing, complexifying thing. But really, critical race theory is simply in a very. I will just share one quick description of it, and then I will explain it further. It's simply a race-centric version of Marxism and postmodernism, right? It's really a combination of the two ideologies, which are already very similar, but very much in a race-centric point of view. So what critical race theory is really saying is that it's not just saying, as critical race theorists claim these days, where they just say that, well, it's simply us describing the history of racism in America or Canada. Mm-hmm. That's not what they're saying at all. In fact, they are very much saying that it's not that they're talking about racism being having been there in Canada, a very parts. What they're saying is Canada is irredeemably racist because of our values, because of our principles, because of our systems. Right? There's a book by the founder of critical race theory, whose name is Derek Bell, and he says that racism will never, ever end. And by racism, he means systemic racism, that America will always be racist. And that's because, again, if America continues to be America, as in if they uphold their principles and their values, then they will always be racist. And that's also true for Canada. It's true for every Western nation of critical race theories, including Canada. So our founding principles, our Constitution is racist because in their mind, it was built by white people for white people, right? So that even you mentioned math. So even math, 2 + 2, you would think, how is that racist? But they say it's racist because in their mind it's developed by white people to manipulate black people into playing within their system. And they would say that the reason why black people are struggling in the schools is because it was built by white people for white people.
Okay, I'm
And
going
which
to pause you there because you've said a lot and we've got to really unpack it all, but we've got to take a commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're in conversation with Samuel Sey, who's unpacking critical race theory for us and for all of you viewers. Samuel, thanks again for joining us. Just before commercial break, we were talking about how, I guess, the critical race theory, how it explains that, 2 + 2 = 4. You were saying that that's because it came from white European males, if you will, and that has influenced and has been created for whites. See, for me, I just think, well, 2 + 2 = 4 because that's an objective truth. I took math in university. There was no room for debate on that. It's pretty much an objective discipline. How can people understand that, or how can we see things other than that? How is that an even possible to be a theory?
Exactly. So you mentioned a very key word there, objective truth. As I mentioned earlier, it is a race-centric version of postmodernism. So they don't believe in objective truth the way you and I would. They believe that what you think is objective and truth is just from your white privilege understanding, where you are speaking in a way that only makes sense to you. And then someone like me being a black person, they would basically say that, well, I have a different view, but you're forcing me to accept yours because of your, in their mind, postmodernist oppressive view towards me. So they really believe that there is no objective reality in this sense, right? And that's how their postmodernism shapes up, even in things like this. And of course, it creates a very dangerous reality where they're really saying that there are two different realities, two different worlds, and that by being white, you have a different value system, or you have a different way of understanding truth and injustice in the same way. And then, which leads to some other issues as well, too, as to how I, as a black person, they would claim I'm able to understand racism and injustice better than you can because of their postmodern thinking of relativism, right? In that I, being a black person, have a special insight that you can never have. And therefore, anything you say about, if I as a black person was saying that, well, 2 + 2 is 5, and then you go against it, then I can simply say, well, you don't understand my perspective, and therefore you're racist.
Well, I can imagine there are going to be many, many confused children in our classrooms in this country if this goes ahead. Now, you mentioned something else that was interesting, and I've heard this said before, and I'd like you to explain it. You said that critical race theory has its roots in Marxism. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, there is a book by one of the founders. His name is Charles W. Mills, and the book is simply titled From Class to Race. And that's very, very important. I always point people to that book as one of the most important books within critical race theory. And basically what this author is saying is that critical race theory was developed out of Marxism, but it's since changed what they consider the essential conflict. So essentially, for those who may not know, Marxism essentially teaches that society is made up of the oppressor and the oppressed, but particularly the rich versus the poor, right? It's based on the class struggle, a class conflict. That's what they say. Critical race theory say that, well, Marx was wrong. In fact, they say Marx was racist. They say he was racist because in his white privilege understanding, he thought the essential conflict was really the economy. Mm-hmm. And instead of addressing that, the real issue was racism. So critical race theory is saying that, look, Marx was right, that there is a conflict between two warring groups, but it's not a class struggle, it's a race struggle. And therefore, critical race theorists believe the only way you can have justice is if you have a revolution. But instead of it being, of course, a economic revolution through socialism, it includes that too. But you also have to have a cultural revolution where you accomplish that through postmodernist thinking, like social justice and all these things. And the key word there is equity, right? They believe then the only way you can have justice is if you essentially discriminate against white people and by bringing them lower, and then they think you help out black people or non-white people by bringing them higher, which is of course impossible.
So this is that concept of equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity.
Absolutely, absolutely. In his book, right now, the most famous critical race theorist is Ibram Kendi, and in his book, "How to Be an Anti-Racist," which I call "How to Be a Racist," that's really what the book is, right? In his
Wow.
book, is that the remedy for past discrimination is present or future discrimination. He says that racial discrimination is only wrong if it leads to inequity, but it's good if it leads to equity. What he's saying there is it's okay to be a racist so long as it's against white people, which will bring about more equality of outcome, right? And of course, those are evil words. Those are racist. But because he's speaking as an anti-racist, people oftentimes will think, well, then wait a minute, he's just simply trying to end racism, right? So they use these words, but they really mean the opposite, which is why in Bill 67, they claim it's really just about equity and anti-racism, but
Okay, I'm going to
instead,
pause you there. We got to cut to commercial, but I do want to talk about Bill 67 when we return in just a few moments. Stick around. I want to talk about Bill 67, which is an Ontario bill. But before that, I want to know, how has critical race theory permeated Canadian society? Because many people watching might think, well, that's an American issue. You know, we don't have race issues really here in Canada. Some people might think that. You know, critical race theory now seems to be an American solution to that problem. We don't have this in Canada. Well, do we? Is critical race theory an issue in Canada?
yeah, what I'm gonna say shocks a lot of Canadians, but it's a fact. Critical race theory is just as popular here, or probably even more popular here than it is in the U.S. The difference is that we don't have a strong, our media, legacy media, teaches critical race theory without the opposition, without the conservative view on it. So people don't even realize that what they're hearing is critical race theory. Every poll suggests that Canadians believe that Canada is just as racist as America is, right?
Wow.
For example, there was a poll that came out early last year, or maybe it was late 2020, which said that about 55% of Canadians believe that Canada is systemically racist. In the U.S., the number was exact same as well. And again,
And
that's
what does
because
that mean, systemically racist? Could you explain that for our viewers?
yeah, so systemically racist means that our institutions, our culture, our values are racist. That they're meant to benefit white people at the expense of non-white people, right? And that's what basically it means. So yeah, so we hear we know that Canada and America have a very different history, and
Mm-hmm.
yet here people think that Canada is as racist as America. Well, why? Because again, critical race theory isn't about the number of racist laws throughout American history or Canadian history. It's about the values. I think a lot of conservatives have an idea that it's really dealing with slavery or segregation. It's not about that at all. It really is about saying that our founding values are racist because they hate the capitalist system. They hate liberty. They really do. They say freedom is racist. For example, you saw that
That freedom is racist.
yeah, in Canada. So about how common it is, the federal government, right, has been teaching in a lot of their anti-racist diversity inclusion courses. The federal government, right, they've been teaching that freedom is white supremacist. They've been teaching that objectivity is white supremacist. These are things that are available. Trudeau has a federal anti-racist strategy. It's all critical race theory.
Wow.
The government has spent, I think they're planning on spending, I'm forgetting exactly how much, but tens of millions of dollars on educating Canadians on how systemically racist Canada is. So these things are very much common. Even in Ontario, I know we'll address it later on, but even the government has been teaching critical race theory in some forms as well. And I'll just tell you just how common it is as well too. I'm a Christian, and early last year, for Black History Month in 2021, a Christian school invited me to come talk about racism for Black History Month at their school. This is a school in Alberta. And it's supposed to be a Christian conservative school. I guess they assumed that since I was a Black person, that if I were to come there and speak on racism, that I would be speaking what they wanted me to speak. They didn't know, I guess, where I really stood on
Oh,
racism.
wow.
And you just wait to hear the end of the story. When I went there, I basically said, look, I do not believe in systemic racism. I do not believe that Canada is systemically racist. Well, one, racism is as a Christian, it's partiality or bias against someone because of the skin color, no matter they're black or white. Black people can be racist. And then I said that if you use the word system, you have to be able to identify a racist policy or law within our system. And I asked the students, if you can find one single policy or one single policy or law that's racist in our country, name them. No one could name it. Simply saying that, I left the talk and I thought everything was fine. Well, about a month later, the school releases a statement denouncing me without mentioning my name, but denouncing me, saying that I was denigrating the students, I was attacking the students, and that I as a black person.
I was going to say, you as a black person invited to discuss racism was in a sense canceled?
Yes. Yeah. In an all white faculty, by the way, that I was basically defending our systemically racist nation. Right now, they didn't mention my name, and I replied to them, and the National Post covered it, and they ended up backtracking a little bit. But
wow.
The reality of this is, you would think that a Christian university would be one of the most conservative, anti-leftist, anti-critical race theorist schools out there, and yet amongst many schools like that, in every school, basically, or every kind of school, anyways, in Canada, they're embracing critical race theory.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there. We got to take a commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're wrapping up our discussion on critical race theory, and joining me is Samuel Sey. Samuel, thanks again for joining me. You've given so much insight here. I could do 3 shows on this topic. You may know that I, was very critical of Ontario's radical education, sexual education, sex ed, with the gender identity theory and so on, being pushed on children. Now we're hearing that the Ontario Conservative Ford government is now basically pushing critical race theory on kids, or it's being taught to kids in Canada and in Ontario. Can you give us some concrete examples? I mean, you named one in Alberta through your personal experience. Tell us about how it is actually being taught to kids in Canada.
Yeah, I mentioned the author Ibram Kendi, who wrote the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And he has a children's version of the book called The Anti-Racist Baby. And I have the book, I've read the book. In the book, it's basically teaching kids to repeat to themselves that they are either racist or anti-racist.
Really?
Right? That's what they're saying. Now, I mentioned that book because in many Ontario schools, I've received internal documents from teachers, and not to promote my blog, but I've mentioned it on my blog. And so people can look for it. It's at slowtowrite.com. They can go look at it.
Slowtowrite.com.
Yeah. And these internal documents, the faculty are being pressured to teach or to repeat, to read this book to kids so they can repeat it. That I think something like the anti-racist baby. So the anti-racist baby hates racism and loves justice. Things like that. They're using a lot of words, but then within them, they're also teaching exactly very much what you said as well too. They're teaching LGBTQ ideas as well too to kids as early as kindergarten students.
It's a 4-year-old. Right? That's 4-year-old.
Yes, this is in Ontario. So this is very much happening across all of Ontario, really across Canada. But I can speak of, this is happening in Peel, it's happening at TDSB, it's happening in so many other schools or school boards across our province. And I've had many parents reaching out to me and asking their schools if they're teaching critical race theory. And they will oftentimes say, no, we are not. We're simply teaching anti-racism and equity. But of course, that's another word for critical race theory.
Okay, and now we have in Ontario Bill 67 that just passed second reading. Only one MPP, Belinda Carahalios, voted against it. Rick Nichols claimed he wasn't understanding it, and he said he will vote against it for third reading. Okay, so maybe there will be 2. But all the Conservatives voted for this, and it was an NDP-sponsored bill called Racial Equity in the Education System Act. What are the concerns you have? We only have a couple minutes, so what are the concerns you have with this bill?
The bill is that it would make critical race theory even more prominent and more entrenched in our systems. Right now, it's being taught voluntarily by the school boards. But if this passes, it will be more entrenched, and that it will be extremely difficult for us to fight back against it, which is why I think they're doing this. But one more thing that people are forgetting too, in the Ontario government, on their website, they actually have a glossary of terms on dealing with things like critical race theory. It's
Okay.
all there. They're teaching. So before I knew this was coming a long time ago, because for years it's been on the school boards.
Yes.
Sorry, it's been on the school boards and even on the Ontario government website where they're teaching critical race theory as we speak today.
Wow. And so this has been going on for years, not just with the start of the Ford government.
No, yeah, it's been going there for years before the Ford
But
government.
now
Yes,
things are just taken right off.
exactly.
Jordan Peterson also put out a very good video criticizing this bill and said it must be stopped. Again, only one MPP voted against it at second reading. Do you have any anticipation how the final vote will go?
Um, I think they'll probably pass it because of the wording. Is that I think they're going to be afraid that if they don't pass it, be seen as being racist if they're not opposing if they're now opposing the so-called anti-racist bill.
Okay, we only have 45 seconds left. I'm going to end on a very big question. Is Canada a racist country?
Absolutely not. Now, I will say this. Of course, there are racists in Canada. Of course, there are. That's because there are racists where I'm from too, Ghana, right? Ghana, it's an African country, but yet you have racists there. But is the nation itself racist? Absolutely not. If that was the case, my mom wouldn't have left everything behind to bring her and I into a much better country.
Okay, and again, if people want to reach out to you and look up some of your work, where can they go?
They can find me at slowtowrite.com, or they can find me across social media at slow to write.
Okay, Samuel, thank you so much for joining today. Very insightful discussion, 100%.
Thank you so much. It's a deep honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Very insightful discussion on critical race theory. And whether or not you support or you're against critical race theory, one thing is very clear that with Ontario Bill 67, critical race theory will be enshrined into law probably very soon. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.